The day you stop romanticizing people. There is a profound and often misunderstood story attributed to Carl Jung that delves deep into the complexities of human perception and the illusions we construct. It speaks of a woman who once sought his counsel, her spirit utterly broken, not by a simple lie, but by the devastating weight of betrayal. Over and over she articulated her bewilderment, the same phrase echoing her torment. "I don't understand how they could do this to me." Her tears were not merely for a broken trust or a direct deception. They flowed because the idealized person she had so vividly imagined, the very essence of whom she believed them to be, had never, in fact, truly existed. Jung observed something profoundly unsettling in her pain. He recognized that her anguish wasn't stemming directly from an objective reality or a specific harmful act. Instead, it arose from the shattering collapse of her personal fantasy. This is because, at its core, the human mind possesses a dangerous inclination when it encounters individuals it admires, loves, fears, or desires. It instinctively rushes to fill in the missing gaps, constructing a complete picture where only fragments exist. You might meet someone exuding confidence, and immediately your mind, in its desire for security and completeness, assumes they are also inherently loyal. Encountering an attractive person, your subconscious often jumps to the conclusion that they must also be inherently kind. Or perhaps someone demonstrates a moment of profound emotional understanding, and from that single instance, your mind begins to meticulously build an entire intricate personality around them, a persona that was never authentically present in the first place. The sobering truth, then, is that most individuals are not genuinely engaging in relationships with others as they truly are. Instead, they are deeply involved in relationships with their own sophisticated psychological projections. And inevitably, with a quiet yet undeniable force, reality makes its unwelcome arrival, often feeling like the sudden, sharp blade of a knife. It doesn't typically announce itself with a loud crash or dramatic confrontation, but rather insidiously, through subtle shifts, delayed replies that hint at disinterest, disrespect cleverly disguised as casual jokes, a sudden and inexplicable distance that emerges once you are no longer perceived as useful, or that unsettling realization that someone's affection and value for you seem entirely conditional on your emotional availability to them. You have very likely experienced this sensation before, perhaps without consciously acknowledging its full implication. It's that poignant moment when you slowly, reluctantly, come to understand that the cherished version of someone residing so warmly within your mind feels far more comforting and appealing than the actual person standing right in front of you. This realization, once truly absorbed, is transformative, because once you gain this clarity, you begin to perceive with alarming frequency how people constantly perform carefully curated versions of themselves, subtly adapting their persona depending on their current company. The loyal, unwavering friend you know so well can become a strikingly different individual when observed in another setting, among other people. The person who always seems so nice and accommodating can abruptly turn cold and cruel the moment they acquire a position of social power or advantage. Someone who loudly proclaimed their love for honesty and directness becomes fiercely defensive the very instant you actually speak your truth to them. And the most profoundly unsettling aspect of all this is the widespread phenomenon that most people are not consciously, deliberately pretending. They genuinely, wholeheartedly believe that they are the very mask, the very role they so diligently perform. Carl Jung, with his profound insights into the human psyche, posited that every human being carries within them a shadow, an intrinsic hidden part of themselves that they stubbornly refuse to acknowledge or confront. The more vehemently someone avoids facing this buried shadow, the more brittle and artificial their public personality inevitably becomes. This fundamental truth explains why some individuals, after you've known them for a sufficient period, begin to feel strangely hollow or empty beneath their polished exterior. Eventually, the carefully constructed performance inevitably starts to glitch. The mask, for a fleeting, terrifying second, slips, revealing the raw insecurity lurking beneath their charming facade, the subtle envy hidden beneath their overt support, or the deep-seated need for control, subtly woven into their expressions of affection. People, it turns out, don't truly fear being seen. They fear being seen completely, in all their unfiltered complexity. And perhaps this is precisely why the moment you finally cease romanticizing people, while you strip away your idealized projections, feels so profoundly unsettling, even disorienting. It's because in that clarity you begin to grasp just how much of your past suffering and emotional pain originated from loving illusions. Illusions meticulously crafted and nurtured by your own mind for others. Following this seismic realization, something subtle yet fundamental begins to shift deep within your being. You stop solely listening to the words people articulate. Instead, you begin to meticulously study their recurring patterns of behavior. And these consistent patterns, far more eloquently than any spoken words, unveil truths that people often spend their entire lives desperately trying to conceal. You start to notice with unnerving precision how some individuals only become overtly affectionate or engaged when they sense you pulling away, when your attention seems to wane. You observe how a sudden, newfound respect often appears only after you've established distance or asserted boundaries. You perceive how attention and validation from others paradoxically increase the moment you genuinely stop chasing them. Once your perception is sharpened, it becomes virtually impossible not to see these underlying dynamics. Human behavior, you realize, is profoundly reactive. It often responds more to perceived scarcity or challenge than to simple presence. Most people, in fact, do not truly value what is readily available and present. They tend to place a higher value on what feels difficult to acquire or secure. This is why genuine kindness, especially when offered without clear boundaries, is so often overlooked, taken for granted, or even exploited until it inevitably disappears. Unconditional kindness, offered without self-protection, subtly but effectively teaches others how to take advantage of you. What's even more frightening is how early this conditioning, these fundamental human dynamics, begin to take root. Even in the seemingly innocent environment of school, you likely witnessed these patterns unfold without fully comprehending them. The quietest, most accommodating student often became an easy target, simply because their nature tolerated disrespect. The outwardly confident individual would receive admiration and popularity, often despite treating others poorly or with disregard. The one who constantly sacrificed their own needs for everyone else slowly, heartbreakingly, faded into invisibility. It's as if human beings, unconsciously, organize themselves and their social hierarchies around the axis of power long before any concept of morality or fairness truly enters their conscious awareness. Carl Jung also believed that whatever people reject or suppress within themselves, their own flaws, insecurities, or undesirable traits, eventually gets projected onto others. Once you truly internalize this concept of psychological projection, the entirety of social life can become a psychologically disturbing spectacle. The deeply insecure individuals, for instance, are often the quickest to accuse others of desperately seeking attention. The dishonest become pathologically obsessed with issues of loyalty and betrayal in others. Those driven by a powerful need for control will often label themselves as benevolent protectors, and the people most terrified of abandonment are, tragically, often the very ones who emotionally suffocate and drive others away. Everyone, without exception, eventually reveals their true selves, not through explicit confessions or dramatic declarations, but through the consistent repetition of their behaviors over time. This is precisely why a heightened awareness fundamentally alters your relationships forever. You cease judging people based on isolated incidents or singular moments, and instead begin observing their consistent behavioral patterns over an extended period. And that consistency, unyieldingly, exposes the deeper reality. You start to see the friend who only reaches out during their own emotional crises, never when things are calm. You notice the person who subtly competes with you in every single conversation, unable to genuinely celebrate your successes. You recognize relationships where every vulnerability you share somehow, inexplicably, becomes ammunition used against you later. Initially, these hard-won realizations are incredibly painful because your mind, driven by attachment and investment, desperately wants to defend and protect those you care about, especially those into whom you've poured significant emotional energy. So, you rationalize away every red flag, every inconsistency. They're just stressed, you tell yourself. They didn't mean it, that's just how they are, you might reason. But eventually, a far darker and more unsettling thought begins to penetrate your consciousness. What if you've been consistently translating blatant disrespect into mere misunderstanding, not out of genuine empathy, but simply because you harbored a deep-seated fear of losing these people? This single penetrating question changes everything, because many relationships, you come to understand, survive not through love, but through a tenacious, often destructive denial. Denial, in its insidious way, keeps dysfunctional families outwardly functioning. Denial keeps deeply toxic friendships artificially alive for years, binding people to dynamics that slowly erode their souls. Denial allows individuals to remain emotionally attached to those who have long since ceased to genuinely value them. Most relationships, in their truest sense, don't actually end when respect irrevocably disappears. They end, often quietly and internally, the moment genuine awareness finally appears. And that awareness, once it takes root, inevitably creates distance, not always physically, but always psychologically. You begin to feel an increasing detachment in conversations that once held profound meaning for you. Certain compliments from others start to sound alarmingly transactional, designed to elicit something in return. Specific acts of affection begin to feel strategic and calculated rather than truly sincere. You find yourself no longer hypnotized by superficial charm, and once that spell is broken, the deeper, often uncomfortable social dynamics become impossible to ignore. You start to acutely notice how social groups silently punish authenticity, how people grow visibly uncomfortable when someone refuses to perform a socially expected role. You see how honesty, raw and unfiltered, often threatens entire social structures meticulously built on polite deception. This is because most social systems are not, at their foundation, built upon truth. They are constructed upon a mutual unspoken agreement, an implicit pact to avoid saying what everyone involved already silently observes. And the individual who dares to shatter that comfortable illusion first, by speaking an uncomfortable truth, often becomes unfairly labeled as the problem. This is the strange, almost paradoxical punishment that accompanies seeing reality with unclouded eyes. You become significantly harder to manipulate or deceive, but you also, often, find it harder to genuinely belong anywhere, to feel truly at home in conventional social settings. Because once you cease romanticizing people, once you strip away the layers of your own projections, you inevitably begin to realize just how much of social life, how much of human interaction, fundamentally relies on an intricate, constant performance. You observe with a new clarity how readily people alter their demeanor and behavior depending on the perceived status of those around them. The insecure person becomes overtly agreeable and subservient around figures of authority. The outwardly confident person, conversely, might suddenly become dismissive and even disdainful when confronted with perceived weakness or vulnerability. Even personal morality, you discover, often shifts and adapts according to potential social rewards or consequences. Someone might publicly condemn betrayal with great fervor, while secretly engaging in acts of disloyalty in their private life. Another will passionately preach the virtues of honesty, while meticulously constructing an elaborate public image designed to control every aspect of external perception. And perhaps the most disturbing revelation of all is that many people engaging in these behaviors are not even consciously aware they are doing it. Carl Jung understood a brutal, fundamental truth about human nature. The ego, that core sense of self, will protect its carefully constructed image at almost any cost. People desperately want to believe they are fundamentally good, decent individuals. So, instead of courageously confronting their inner darkness, their less palatable traits, they ingeniously create elaborate psychological explanations and justifications for them. Cruelty in this twisted logic becomes just being honest. Manipulation transforms into an expression of love. A desperate need for control is reframed as protection, and raw jealousy is conveniently rebranded as concern. The human mind, you come to see, is terrifyingly skilled at disguising its true motives, especially from itself. This is why some of the most genuinely dangerous people are not the openly malicious or overtly aggressive ones. They are, rather, the individuals who are completely, utterly convinced of their own unwavering innocence and moral righteousness. And if you have lived long enough, you have undoubtedly encountered this specific type of person before. The friend who constantly tears you down, always for your own good. The partner who makes you feel crippling guilt for simply needing personal space. The person who expertly creates emotional chaos and then acts profoundly wounded or victimized when you inevitably react to it. They subtly yet effectively drain your energy while meticulously maintaining the public image of being the long-suffering victim. Because victimhood itself, in certain social dynamics, can become a potent form of power. The moment you truly understand these underlying dynamics, your entire perception of human interaction shifts permanently. You cease focusing solely on the literal words people utter. Instead, you begin to ask a far more penetrating question. What emotional outcome does this person truly want to achieve from me? This single question, you discover, reveals almost everything. Some individuals crave unceasing admiration. Others desire complete obedience. Some seek profound emotional dependence from those around them. Still others simply want someone beneath them, someone they can subtly control or feel superior to, thereby temporarily escaping their own deep-seated feelings of inadequacy. People, you realize, rarely seek genuine connection as purely and altruistically as they claim. More often, their quest is for emotional regulation, subtle, often unconscious way, to soothe an inner emptiness or discomfort they cannot bear to face alone. And this is precisely where the romantic illusion, so carefully woven into our societal fabric, also begins its inevitable collapse. Because many relationships, you come to understand, are not built on selfless, unconditional love. They are, in fact, constructed upon complex, often unspoken, unconscious psychological contracts. I will make you feel valuable, one might implicitly promise, if you make me feel wanted. Or, I will be your savior, your constant support, if you promise to never leave me. I will admire you profoundly, another unspoken pact dictates, if you protect me from the terrifying void of loneliness. This fundamental truth explains why people can appear to change so abruptly and dramatically once the underlying emotional transaction within a relationship ceases to benefit them. It's not that they genuinely transformed overnight. Rather, the mask they wore was implicitly attached to a specific condition, and those conditions, sooner or later, inevitably reveal their true nature. You can observe this phenomenon with striking clarity after significant life events. A major success, a profound failure, or a deeply personal transformation. Achieve success, and previously hidden envy from others frequently surfaces. Allow yourself to be truly vulnerable, and subtle disrespect, long suppressed, often rises to the surface. Courageously set healthy boundaries, and hidden entitlement, once comfortably assumed, dramatically reveals itself. Nothing, it seems, exposes the raw truth of human nature faster than altering the established role people have assigned to you. The once quiet person finds their confidence. The agreeable individual begins to articulate a firm no. The insecure person embarks on a journey of healing and self-worth. Suddenly, the very people who claim to love them often start to feel deeply uncomfortable, even resentful. Why? Because some relationships were unconsciously built not on your strengths, but specifically around your weaknesses, your malleability, or your perceived need for their presence. People don't always truly love who you are becoming. Sometimes they loved who you used to be, when you were easier to control, more predictable, or more dependent. And this profound realization, rather than making you hate humanity, simply, cleanly, removes the lingering fantasy. Once that fantasy definitively disappears, the experience of loneliness itself begins to feel profoundly different. It doesn't necessarily feel heavier, rather it feels sharper, more precise. You begin to truly grasp that being surrounded by people and being genuinely understood are two entirely distinct experiences. Some of the loneliest individuals you will ever encounter have active phones, crowded social calendars, numerous relationships, and engage in conversations every single day. Yet, tragically, nobody around them truly sees them beyond their utility, their projected identity, or the expectations placed upon them. And perhaps you felt this before, this subtle yet pervasive sense, without knowing precisely how to describe it. That strange, deep exhaustion after a period of intense socializing. The sensation that you were physically present, yes, but psychologically you were engaged in an elaborate performance, as if you spent hours meticulously enacting a version of yourself that kept everyone else comfortable, while your authentic self remained carefully hidden beneath layers of artifice. Carl Jung famously believed that the greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parents. But this very same pattern, this legacy of unfulfilled potential and societal pressure, continues to manifest everywhere in adulthood too. Society, from an early age, begins to reward conformity and the adoption of specific masks. Be agreeable, be attractive, be successful, be useful, be emotionally digestible. Slowly, insidiously, people cease to ask themselves the fundamental question of who they truly are. Instead, they begin to ask a far more dangerous question: what version of me will get accepted the fastest and most widely? And once an individual constructs their entire identity around this external quest for acceptance, genuine authenticity begins to feel not liberating, but profoundly threatening. This is why truly self-aware individuals often, without even trying, make others feel distinctly uncomfortable. Their mere presence exposes the inherent performance in those around them. A person who no longer desperately seeks external validation becomes remarkably difficult to control or manipulate. Someone who has found comfort and strength in solitude becomes equally resistant to manipulation. And a person who sees right through emotional games and psychological maneuvers simply stops feeding into them, cutting off the desired response. And people, you will notice, perceive this immediately, even if it is never articulated aloud. There's a very clear reason why some individuals experience a loss of friendships after they become more confident, more disciplined, or more emotionally independent. Personal growth fundamentally alters social balance. The insecure friend might suddenly feel profoundly inferior in your evolving presence. The controlling partner loses their accustomed influence and leverage. The attention-seeking individual no longer receives the constant reassurance and validation they once demanded. And beneath all these shifts lies a disturbing truth that most people actively avoid confronting. Many relationships are held together less by genuine love and more by unconscious, mutual dependency. One person might desperately need admiration, while the other needs a profound sense of purpose derived from providing it. One might require emotional rescue, while the other needs to feel perpetually needed. This delicate, often unspoken arrangement functions smoothly until one person evolves beyond their assigned role. Then suddenly the relationship begins to crack and fracture in unexpected places, precisely because awareness, once it dawns, ruthlessly destroys these unconscious contracts. This is why the process of personal healing and growth can often feel socially perilous. When you stop tolerating disrespect, manipulative people will quickly label you as selfish. When you cease over-explaining yourself, insecure individuals may perceive you as distant or cold. When you finally stop chasing external approval and validation, some people will lose interest in you entirely. This doesn't happen because you have somehow become a worse person. It happens because your fundamental role within those relationships has changed. And most human relationships, you discover, are far more role-based than people are willing to admit. The funny friend, the strong one, the ever-listening ear, the constant helper. The very moment you stop performing your assigned familiar role, people react as if you have violated an invisible, yet deeply understood agreement. Because in many cases, you inadvertently have. The truly terrifying realization is that very few people genuinely desire complete authenticity from others. Complete, unfiltered authenticity, you see, profoundly disrupts social comfort and the delicate equilibrium of polite society. Imagine for a moment if everyone openly admitted their jealousies, their deep insecurities, their desperate need for validation, their hidden resentments, their profound fear of abandonment, their relentless desire for control. Most relationships, if subjected to this raw, unvarnished honesty, would likely collapse under its immense weight. So society, in its infinite wisdom, survives through a carefully managed partial truth, through meticulously maintained masks, through polite performances, and through a mutual unspoken agreement of avoidance. And the individual who begins to perceive all this with undeniable clarity often undergoes a strange and profound psychological shift. They stop feeling shocked or personally offended by seemingly irrational human behavior because they finally, truly understand its underlying motivations. However, understanding human nature too deeply can also create a dangerous temptation, that of detachment. Not a peaceful, healthy detachment, but a cold, almost cynical detachment. The kind where you begin to automatically expect manipulation before kindness, self-interest before loyalty, and calculated performance before genuine sincerity. At first, this cold detachment feels intelligent, even protective. You tell yourself that you have finally woken up, that you now see people for what they truly are, stripped of illusion. But this, crucially, is where many people profoundly misunderstand Jung's deeper message. For him, seeing the darkness and flaws in others is only half of the journey. The real, truly unsettling horror begins when you courageously recognize that same darkness, those same flaws, those same insidious impulses, residing unmistakably inside yourself. That moment usually arrives with a quiet, insidious force. You might catch yourself secretly enjoying someone's failure, feeling a quiet, illicit validation when another person becomes insecure in your presence, or deliberately withholding affection to regain a sense of control. You might find yourself performing confidence while expertly hiding your own deep-seated fear, or pretending not to care because caring feels profoundly dangerous and exposing. And suddenly, in a flash of uncomfortable recognition, the cherished image of yourself as fundamentally different or better than others also begins to collapse. That, precisely, is the shadow Jung so persistently warned about. Not inherently evil, but rather the hidden, unacknowledged aspects of our shared humanity. These are the parts of yourself that you painstakingly separated from your conscious identity because they felt unacceptable, shameful, or too vulnerable to bear. Jealousy, overwhelming neediness, ego-driven impulses, manipulative tendencies, dark or cruel fantasies, the primal desire to dominate, the yearning to be worshipped, the profound wish to be chosen above all others. These are all components of the human shadow. Most people spend their entire lives pretending these powerful impulses simply do not exist within them. But repression does not and cannot destroy darkness. It merely buries it alive, and buried things inevitably exert a powerful, unconscious influence on behavior from beneath the surface. This is why the very people who most vehemently project an image of moral superiority are sometimes the most psychologically dangerous. Their shadow, so thoroughly denied and repressed, leaks out unconsciously through passive aggression, subtle emotional control, harsh judgment of others, or festering, hidden resentment. The human mind is indeed a strange and complex landscape. The more desperately someone needs to appear innocent and pure, the more carefully and discerningly you should observe their actions. Because true self-awareness, the result of confronting one's shadow, usually cultivates genuine humility, not a false sense of perfection. A person who has bravely confronted their own shadow understands, with sober clarity, what they are truly capable of under specific conditions. They grasp that morality is often far more fragile and situational than society is willing to admit. Introduce enough fear, humiliation, power, loneliness, or intense desire into any human being, and their behaviors can change with astonishing speed and severity. History has, tragically, proven this repeatedly. Civilized people can become shockingly cruel, faster than they could ever imagine. Loyal people can betray. Honest people can lie. Kind people can dehumanize others when social approval or personal gain rewards such behavior. Most individuals, you come to realize, are not static, stable identities. They are adaptable psychological conditions, constantly shifting and reacting. And once you truly understand this, your entire perception of the simplistic dichotomy of good and evil becomes far less rigid, far more nuanced. You cease to arbitrarily divide humanity into clear-cut heroes and villains, into monsters and saints. Instead, you begin to see a landscape populated by wounded egos, driven by unconscious fears, propelled by hidden desires, governed by powerful survival instincts, and burdened by unresolved shame. You start to perceive people, including yourself, as inherently psychologically fragmented, a mosaic of conflicting impulses and experiences. This realization is profoundly uncomfortable because it utterly destroys many comforting moral fantasies. The fantasy that you would always unequivocally do the right thing. The fantasy that love automatically purifies and elevates people beyond reproach. The dangerous fantasy that awareness alone somehow makes someone immune to the pervasive pull of darkness. It doesn't. Awareness simply gives you a choice. Most people remain controlled by deeply ingrained patterns they never bother to examine. But the person who actively confronts their shadow begins to notice those patterns in real time within themselves. The subtle urge to manipulate, the persistent urge to seek external validation, the reflexive urge to punish rejection, the insidious urge to maintain control through silence, guilt, or emotional withdrawal. And for the first time, they grasp something truly terrifying. Human beings are far less rational than they desperately pretend to be. Most behavior, you conclude, is simply emotional survival, wearing the thin disguise of intellectual justification. After this profound realization, the world, paradoxically, starts to feel quieter. Not necessarily calmer, but quieter. The cacophony of your own projections and expectations fades. You stop constantly expecting people to become the idealized version of themselves they once promised or hinted at. You cease being genuinely surprised when admiration inexplicably morphs into envy, when unwavering loyalty bends and breaks under sufficient pressure, or when affection dramatically disappears the very moment it ceases to be convenient for someone. And strangely, this newfound clarity begins to make you more observant and less emotionally reactive. You start to notice, with a keen and almost painful precision, how desperately people attempt to escape from themselves. Some pursue this through a relentless string of relationships, others through the relentless pursuit of status. Many seek refuge in constant noise, an insatiable demand for attention, the numbing embrace of substances, the fleeting high of achievements, the curated illusion of social media, endless shallow conversations, or ceaseless external stimulation. Anything, absolutely anything, to avoid sitting alone long enough to clearly hear the often uncomfortable whispers of their own mind. Because silence, you understand, forces confrontation. And confrontation, especially when a person has meticulously built their entire identity around external validation, is utterly terrifying. Carl Jung famously declared, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Most people, tragically, never fully realize how much of their personality, their choices, and their perceived destiny are in fact automated by these unconscious patterns. They believe they genuinely fell in love, but often they were simply repeating familiar childhood attachment patterns, blindly drawn to the comfortable or chaotic dynamics of their past. They lament having bad luck with people, yet unconsciously, they consistently choose individuals who embody familiar emotional dynamics, no matter how unhealthy. They believe everyone eventually betrays them, yet they often ignore every glaring warning sign, every red flag, precisely because fantasy, however fragile, feels inexplicably safer than the raw, unpredictable truth of reality. Human beings, it turns out, don't solely seek happiness, they fundamentally seek familiarity, even when that familiarity brings them immense pain. This is the profound, often tragic reason why some individuals repeatedly return to toxic relationships, cling to manipulative friendships, and consistently choose emotionally unavailable partners. The pain itself, in its predictable recurrence, feels familiar, and that very familiarity, however destructive, creates a warped sense of psychological comfort and predictability. This is also why people resist change so violently, so viscerally. Change, to them, threatens the very fabric of their constructed identity. If someone has spent years defining themselves as the victim, the prospect of healing can feel terrifyingly akin to losing themselves entirely. If someone has built their entire sense of worth around being perpetually needed, establishing healthy boundaries feels utterly terrifying and destructive. If someone survives through meticulous control, genuine vulnerability feels unbearable, like a death. Most people, you realize, are not protecting truth. They are fiercely protecting the intricate, often fragile structures of their identity. And once you truly understand this, you cease taking certain behaviors so personally. The blatant disrespect, the aggressive projections, the subtle manipulation, the bewildering emotional inconsistency. Much of it, you come to grasp, was never truly about you as an individual. You simply, perhaps inadvertently, triggered unresolved parts within them, deep-seated wounds or fears that they were desperately trying to avoid facing within themselves. Sometimes, your growing confidence uncomfortably reminds someone of their own gnawing insecurity. Sometimes, your increasing independence threatens someone else's desperate need for control. Sometimes, your personal growth starkly exposes another person's stagnation, their unwillingness or inability to evolve. And instead of confronting these painful truths within themselves, they punish you psychologically. Not always openly, of course. Sometimes, it manifests through subtle withdrawal, passive-aggressive remarks, dismissive humor, strategically withheld support, inexplicable shifts in energy, or tiny emotional punishments that are almost impossible to logically explain to others. But you feel them nonetheless, especially once your perception becomes acutely sharpened. Because awareness, once fully embodied, profoundly alters the way human interaction resonates and feels within your very body. You begin sensing tension lurking beneath forced politeness, a subtle competition simmering underneath exaggerated praise, a quiet resentment festering beneath superficial friendliness. The social mask, once opaque, becomes increasingly transparent. And that newfound transparency, you must be careful, can also become isolating, because eventually a dangerous existential thought inevitably appears. If everyone is perpetually wearing masks, is genuine, authentic connection even truly real or possible? That question, once it takes root, can sit in the mind like a slow-acting poison. Some individuals, after reaching this stage, become deeply cynical, cold, and emotionally unreachable. They convince themselves that trust is merely a weakness and that detachment is the ultimate form of intelligence. But Jung, you recall, believed in something far deeper, far more balanced. The ultimate goal was never to become naively oblivious, nor to descend into cynical despair. It was, rather, to become fully conscious, to see human nature, in all its complexity and imperfection, with undeniable clarity, yet without sacrificing or losing your own essential humanity in the process. And that delicate, precarious balance, you discover, is far rarer and more challenging to achieve than most people ever imagine. Because once you truly perceive reality for what it is, once those illusions are shattered, you can never fully return to your former state of comfortable ignorance. You begin to understand, with a clarity that can be both liberating and painful, why some conversations suddenly feel hollow and empty. You comprehend why certain smiles feel rehearsed and artificial. You recognize why some people only genuinely love the parts of you that specifically benefit them or serve their own needs. And why, deep down, almost everyone is silently fighting a private, internal, psychological war that they rarely, if ever, admit aloud. But perhaps the darkest, most profound realization of all is this: the masks themselves were never the inherent problem. The problem was believing that they were permanent, believing that they represented the unchanging, authentic self. Human beings are inherently conflicted, capable of profound love and insidious manipulation, unwavering loyalty and shocking betrayal, deep compassion and casual cruelty, sometimes all within the same fleeting hour. And perhaps true maturity, genuine wisdom, truly begins the moment you finally stop relentlessly searching for perfect people and instead start seeing people as they authentically are: fragmented, wounded, performing, afraid. And yes, crucially, that includes yourself. Because the day you cease romanticizing people, the day you let go of those self-created illusions, is also the precise day you stop desperately needing them to complete the elaborate fantasy residing within your own mind. You stop begging reality to become softer, kinder, or more palatable than it truly is. And strangely, profoundly, that is when your vision for the very first time becomes truly clear. Not optimistically rosy, not pessimistically bleak, but simply, precisely clear. And this clarity, once achieved, irrevocably changes the very way you walk through the world. You become slower to trust, yes, but when you do finally extend your trust, it is far deeper, far more meaningful. You become harder to manipulate, certainly, but also far more honest and discerning with yourself. You find yourself less addicted to external attention, less hypnotized by superficial charm. You become less willing to abandon your own powerful intuition or gut feelings simply to keep someone, anyone, close to you. Because now, you finally understand something that most people spend their entire lives frantically avoiding. The greatest danger you ever faced was never that other people could deceive you. It was, instead, that your own loneliness, your own desires, your own hopes, and your own powerful projections could deceive you first and most profoundly. And once you truly grasp that fundamental truth, human nature ceases to feel shocking, bewildering, or inherently cruel. It simply feels undeniably human.